every year college football has a Cinderella team, a team that is perceived to be middle of the pack to below average, that ends up exceeding expectations and having a double-digit winning season. Last year, that team was Missouri. Who's going to be that team in 2024? I'm picking this year's Cinderella team in college football to be Kentucky football. And that may sound a little bit outrageous considering the fact that Kentucky plays in the toughest conference in college football and they don't have an easy schedule. But when you look at Kentucky's roster, they have everything that you need to compete for a 12 seed or 11 seed in the new expanded college football playoffs. They're going to have really good trench play with their offensive line returning a lot of experience and their defensive line returning a lot of experience as well. You have a really good group of wide receivers and Dane Key, Barry Brown, one of the more underrated wide receiver duos in this conference. If Brock Vandagriff ends up panning out and he plays up to his potential, Kentucky is definitely good enough to win 9, maybe 10 games. And what you have to remember about Kentucky football under Mark Stoops is that they don't recruit at as high as a level as what the other elite tier programs in the SEC do. Kentucky is one of those teams that they bring in these 4 3-star guys and they develop them for 2-3 years. And then once those guys mostly become juniors or seniors, that's when they end up popping off and having a 9-10 win season. They're not a consistent program when it comes to sustaining having a 9-10 win ceiling every year. But they are one of those programs that every once in a while, they end up having an experienced team with a lot of talent and good quarterback play, and they end up winning 10 games. Remember, not too long ago, in 2021, I believe, they had a 10-win season with Will Levis. And then things dropped off once Will Levis left for the NFL. They lost their offensive coordinator, and they brought in the quarterback they had last year, and Devin Leary. He was a major disappointment. But Kentucky is one of those teams that they've adopted, utilizing the transfer portal to find who's going to be their answer at quarterback. And sometimes they've hit, sometimes they've missed, but if they end up hitting on Brock Vandagriff and he reaches his potential, this is a really scary team. They automatically are going to have about 5-6 wins just because you're going to have easy wins against your out-of-conference opponents in Murray State, the Ohio Bobcats, and Southern Miss, and Vanderbilt, Florida, South Carolina, Auburn. I would chalk those up as W's for Kentucky as well. So now at this point, you're up to 7-8 wins. Where are the other couple of wins going to come from? I can definitely see you pulling up an upset against Texas on the road or maybe Tennessee, because everybody says to win in the SEC, you got to have elite trench play. And that's what Kentucky's going to have. Kentucky on their defensive line, there were about 2-3 guys on that unit who are going to be playing on Sundays. Their secondary is inexperienced, but they have the most talented secondary that they've ever recruited. A lot of those guys, yeah, they lack proven reps and they don't have, the in-game production that you would like out of a team that you expect to make it to the 12-team playoffs. But these are some of the more highly touted guys that they've recruited in program history that they're going to have back there in their secondary. And they also are really athletic. Kentucky doesn't have too many areas of weakness that I look at and say, yeah, they don't have a shot at beating Texas on the road. They're really good up front. And when you're really good up front, there's not too many games that you don't have a shot at being able to win. There are a lot of SEC teams this year that have concerns on their O-lines and D-lines. Kentucky isn't one of them. And if Brock Vandagriff can give you high-level quarterback play similar to what you got out of Will Levis a few years ago, I definitely can see this being one of those teams that, like Missouri last year, can surprise everybody, get to 9-10 wins, and sneak into the college football playoffs and be under the radar in the process because everybody's going to be focused on the top teams, but people are going to overlook Kentucky because they're not going to start catching people's attention until late in the season when everybody's like, damn, Kentucky is 8-1, 9-1, 9-2. They got a shot at getting into the college football playoffs. The college football playoffs expanding was the best thing to ever happen to Mark Stoops, because programs like Kentucky occasionally are good enough to get into the college football playoffs. It's just that they haven't been given the opportunity because the margin of error was so small. Now the margin of error is a little bit wider, where Kentucky could have 2 losses and still get in just off the strength of how good the SEC always is. Even if you do have 2 losses to, let's say, Texas or Florida, if you could beat Tennessee on the road, beat Louisville, find a way to upset Georgia at home, that's a strong enough resume for Kentucky to be a playoff team. They're going to have a good defense. Their offense has the capability to be really dynamic and explosive as long as Brock Vandagriff takes that next step, which I believe that he is. They got a new offensive coordinator that they hired from Boise State. So this is a Kentucky team that is being criminally underrated, because they're one of those schools that you don't really think about until they end up having one of those miraculous years when they coming out of nowhere and shock us. And we are always prone to have one of these Cinderella teams every year. Remember in 2020 when Indiana football was like, 9-1 at one point? And what happened after that? Remember the Minnesota Gophers in 2019 when they had that big Cinderella season? Every year we get one of these Cinderella stories, and I believe in 2024 that big Cinderella team in college football this year is going to be the Kentucky Wildcats.